are safe and well. And I'm Tommy from Art Gallery and the curator of Mancapat exhibition, an expression of life through the art of Batik Tenun Gedok, which is happening right now at Stanford Art Center at Waterloo Street in Singapore. And it's going on until the 12th of December. And this exhibition is co-organized by Art Gallery and Sekar Kaum Foundation, and is supported by National Arts Council in Singapore, Embassy of the Republic of Indonesia in Singapore, and Bank Indonesia. Well, I'm right now at Gallery Toko Kita at North Bridge Road, who has kindly hosted us for today's discussion. However, I have managed to put up a virtual background, so as if I am in the space itself of the exhibition. So back to the today's discussion. Today is about Meet the Artists. So who are the artists, right? So first of all, the theme exhibition of Mancapat is actually a set of songs that reflect the Javanese philosophy of Sadulur Papat Kalimo Pancer, which is the circular expression of life. And as we go through the exhibition, it reflects the birth of textiles from cotton seeds, the trials and tribulations of the landscape, and the process, as well as to the maturity in the traditional textiles that people know. Earlier, people were like saying, oh, these are not the traditional types, right? So yes, there are those evolution. And as we are going through that circular life, during the curation process, we were wondering, how do we close the circularity of this textile life cycle? Where would the story goes after a death of someone, right? For this, we invited 3 contemporary artists from Singapore and Indonesia to reflect on their interpretation of Mancapat and gaining inspiration from the textiles that come before them, and hopefully they can inspire and to give birth into a new creations.
Cuma 7 orang sih gerak. Spesial. Oh, kamu ada nih Sheila Chandra.
Sorry.
Apa itu, Mas Tony?
If everyone can mute the microphone. All right. I think I've muted everybody, and sorry for the interruptions. Yes. Where was I? So yes, we invited 3 contemporary artists from Singapore and Indonesia to reflect on their interpretation of Mancapat, how they gain inspiration from the traditional textiles that come before them, and hopefully their own work can inspire and give birth into new creations. And we are very privileged today to have the 3 artists with us today to talk about their work, and maybe they can shed some light on their creative process. So first up, we have Agatha Lee, who we know her as Aggie, who is a Singapore-based textile artist specializing in embroidery. Aggie creates textile collages and 3D textures through free motion machine embroidery, hand stitching, and marking that are not only vibrant and dynamic, but also captivate the viewers to reconnect them with nature and also their inner tortoise, which is to slow down and to appreciate everything around them. So probably I will invite Aggie to introduce herself more and to talk about the work that she created for this exhibition.
Thank you, Tony. I'm just going to share my screen first before I go in. But I want to thank Tony for inviting me to this exhibition, especially all the hard work that he put into it, because I know it's been very difficult during this time.
Thank you.
Okay, can you all see my screen? Oh, where do I
Yes.
put this? Hang on, let me just close this. Okay, so hi, so I'm Aggie. This is the work that I produced for the exhibition. It's called Invisible. I'll show the final piece at the end. The presentation I'll give you basically I'll be introducing the art practice that I have, and then the thought process, and the techniques that I use for the final piece, which is called Invisible.
Tapi saka kene di mute piye carane?
Sorry, let me just.
Okay.
All right.
Yep. So I'm actually a self-taught textile artist. I love anything to do with textiles, which is what attracted me to this exhibition when Tony got in touch with me. But because I'm also very passionate about the environment, having worked in the environmental sector for many years before, and I'm an advocate for the slow movement. So a lot of my work is actually inspired by nature. So I'll just show you a few of the previous works that I've done. Many of the works that I do use a lot of machine embroidery, which is drawing with the sewing machine, which is a bit like drawing with a pencil, except that you use needle and thread. And I also make marks with hand stitching as well. So I basically create collages and 3D sculptures, which get people to actually question their relationship with the environment that they live in, and actually get them to think about what are the better choices that they can make to make the world a better place. So a lot of the work that I do, I try to use findings. Basically, I try not to buy new materials for my work, just to minimize the impact my work has on the environment. And I try to use natural dyes as well, as much as possible. Sometimes it can be very difficult because there are certain colors that you want to achieve in the work. So when we first started the whole process of when we were invited to participate in this exhibition, there was a workshop in August where we all got to meet each other online. It would have been great if we could have been meeting up physically, but it wasn't possible because of COVID. But when we started taking these workshops just to learn about Tuban and then the whole process of making the fabrics, what struck me was the Mancapat philosophy, which Tony shared about earlier on. And the whole, I guess what was intriguing to me was that this philosophy and also the myth that was passed down between generation to generation, the Nini Towak, which is the goddess of the cotton. She's actually the guardian spirit of the production of cotton in the Tuban area. That struck me as something very significant because this myth was passed down from generation to generation. And she is, metaphorically speaking, she contributes to this life cycle of the fabric production within this community, which is very local based, which is very locally based. Like it doesn't get sent somewhere else to be made, but it's all within this community. And being from an environmental background, this really fascinated me because it meant that it had a very low carbon footprint. And I was also fascinated by the fact that this tight-knit community was able to produce this fabric and be part of this textile process, this cycle of life. And that the majority of them, or actually all of them, were women. And when we look at fabric as a person outside of the community, we usually don't think of these people, these artisans who are making them. We just look at the piece of fabric and we think, oh, I can wear this, I can use it in my house. But these people are invisible to us. And so in my piece of work, I wanted to actually bring out this community and to show the amount of work and effort that is involved in making each piece of fabric. And in so doing, the art piece would then create a more intimate connection between the user of the fabric and the artisan. And I felt that was important because at the beginning of the whole process, Nini Toak, the goddess the goddess that the artisans rely on to give them a good harvest of cotton crop, she sends her cotton beans down to the cotton fields, and that's the basic building block. But that her magic runs through the hard work that these ladies produce, and in so doing, their narrative, or rather, and also Nini Toak's narrative, can then be woven into the fabric and gifted to the eventual user. So the first step that I did was to think of, okay, so should I look at the faces or should I look at the hands? And I decided to actually take the hands of the artisans. There are actually up to 10 steps in making of the final piece of fabric. So from picking up the cotton to the spinning to the weaving, and then the final one being the macrame of the piece of fabric, macrame of the ends of the piece of fabric. And because I couldn't be there, so Sekakawang kindly took images of the hands of the ladies. And I settled on using hands because I feel for faces, it's very easily to mask what you're feeling, mask your identity, and everybody wants to put a good side of themselves when that face gets taken. But with hands, you can't hide it, because whatever you do with them, especially when you're doing something repetitive and very labor intensive, the form of your hands change, and that work that work that you do is actually ingrained in the lines, the calluses, and the shape of your hands. So I got the images, and the sketching was to me, it was the easiest part, because the next step was actually to try and bring out the shapes and the lines of the hands in the fabric through stitch. And it took me about, I think the initial months that I was doing this, I was just doing sampling actually. And it was very difficult using just free motion embroidery just to bring out the textures and the lines of the hands. So initially I wanted to just use free motion embroidery, and I realized that it wasn't giving me the desired effect that I wanted. So what then happened was I switched to roughly about 50% free motion embroidery, just to get the outline of the hand, and then to actually use hand embroidery with embroidery thread, and also using the cotton yarns from Sekakawang in the Tuban community. So this blue colored cotton yarn is the indigo dyed cotton yarn. And because they didn't have the pink reddish color that I was looking for, so I used an alternative source for this one here. And it's actually the first time I was hand stitching with a very thicker thickness of thread. So it did get quite a bit of time to get used to. So you might be wondering why I decided to choose the blue, the red, and the white. Basically, those are the colors that are featured in the Tuban's ideological system of color combinations for batik. I think if you go to the exhibition, it will explain clearly the different types of colors. And I wanted that to feature in the exhibit. You'll notice here also there's a brown colored type of cotton thread that is also available from, which was also passed to me by by Seka Kawang. This is the more natural type of colored cotton. So there were two types, of white and also there was brown. This was also made available to me. And what I did with this was I actually created the middle piece of the art piece. So I created this very fine weave of fabric, which actually connected the stages of the cotton fabric making process. So as you can see here, the hands that represent the cotton picking, the spinning, the combing of the thread, then the preparation of the weaving loom, the eventual weaving, and also the macrame are actually laid out around the fabric. So one piece of fabric here is actually made from the cotton yarn. And then the middle piece here is actually made by the ladies at Seka Kawang. So I asked them to weave a fabric at about 50 centimeters, and then they left the rest of it to be raw. So the reason why I laid the pieces out in a circle is basically to pay homage to Nini Towak, because her actions of spinning the wheel basically turn the wheel of the cycle of life of making the fabric. But I also wanted to give each of the hands a connection to the pieces of fabric. Because for the user, we usually see the fabric first, but I wanted them to also see the connection between each of the individuals who are represented in the embroidered hoops, but also by the fact that the hands, the lines in the hands are, or rather the fabric is an extension of the hands, of the lines in the hands of the artisans who make the pieces. Yeah. So so this is the final piece. You can see it at Stanford. So when you go down to look at it, what do you see first? Do you see the fabric, the final piece of fabric, or do you see the lines? And that's why I called this piece invisible, in being in brackets, because I want people to actually question themselves. Do they know the people who actually make the fabric behind what they're wearing, and to also have a more intimate connection with them. So thank you very much. I think questions are at the end. Is that right, Tony?
Yes, we'll do question right at the end.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Aggie. And I love to see your process of experiments. And one thing that struck me was the capturing that lines on the hands, as you said, that the face, you can smile for the cameras, and something that people purposely, consciously pose for it. Whereas
Yes.
with the hands, like there is no way escaping that. And there's a very interesting observation that I thought. Yeah. So next we have Marina Gosali, who is a self-taught stitch artist who has enduring love for batik and anything handcrafted with fine skills and elegance. Marina started a Kupuku Studio, which is a handcraft studio championing the empowerment of children with special needs. and connection to materials, and her intuitions guided her creations. So I shall invite Mbak Marina to unmute and turn on your camera, and yeah, you can introduce yourself and your work.
Hi, everybody. I'm Marina. Let me maybe I read my written to all of you. Dreams, passion belongs to all humans on this earth. From my childhood, teenage, married until now. Big or small, handmade, handicraft that I've done more than passion. There is joy, there is healing, there is peace, there is comfort. Well, that this all flows like water in a river. All concepts and goals as they come out just like that. I firmly believe that spirit exists. In Indonesian, it is magical. I call it goib. But this is not supernatural. Not supernatural. This is my imagination. The spirit is present in this self. Learn and continue to learn that become artworks is a happy one. I hope this clear from my artwork. In my artwork this time, I respond through weaving the dog. Successor waving related stories. I am so very inspired by Nini Tawo, the figure of an old grandmother who has gone to a different dimension. With her love, she continues to spin yarn and send to her favorite community, the Tuban community, to continue to preserve the cultural heritage of our ancestors. The other weaving, the Gadok weaving, tells the story of the circle of life. For me, in my imagination, the circle of life is not always round. It can be square. This is my imagination. In this weaving, there is a message. Continue to work beautifully, caring for the sustainable culture of the Tuban community, maintaining culture. There is from me now. I think we can continue about the about all my artwork because I don't have any picture of my artwork.
Yes, not a problem. If you see the one on my background, these two are Marina's artwork. This long one is the one that is entitled The Circle of Life, the one that she mentioned earlier, and the other two is a pair of work of done on kain tenun Seser Gedok, which is the legend of Nini Tawo, which we will talk about definitely more. And I wanted to, oh yes, I love as I have mentioned earlier, I love the free spirited way and that expression of dreams and imaginations, and the take of like circularity is not always a circle, right? It could be something else of different shapes and stuff. Yes, I would love to ask more about that, but first I will invite Nur Iskandar, or I like to call him Iskandar. And Nur Iskandar is an interdisciplinary artist, writer, and lecturer who is based in Singapore. And Iskandar's research and artistic practice are often artographic in nature, grounded in image culture, text, textile, and the archives. and they thread on the lines of spirituality and sentient spaces, looking at deeper nuances of being, like losing, death, and forgetting. And that is definitely incorporated in his work, which I shall invite Iskandar to turn on your microphone and cameras to introduce yourself and introduce the work. Yeah.
Thank you, Tony. Can I just check? Can you see me? The camera is on the screen share as well.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thanks to Tony again for organizing this and inviting me and two other artists on board. So today is just a brief sharing of the concept and the context of the work. This work is entitled Night is a Textile Made of Light, aka Kain Lupa, Luka, dan Duka. So this work, sorry, I'm hearing sounds. Okay, let me just go back. So for this work, when Tony actually invited me on board for this project, it is very synonymous to my own personal project that I'm currently embarking in. It's called A New Sacred. And this new sacred actually signifies what it is to be normal, or what it is sacred during a time where we are having this pandemic. So I'm looking at ideas of, a migration. I'm looking at ideas of movement and also holiness. And for chapter 1 is about Hijrah. And just so serendipitously, this project involves, crossing between Indonesia and Singapore, which also requires the physical movement of a lot of these materials, and not just that, also the narratives. And I wanted to celebrate all that within a project. So this is a little quick picture of what the final outcome is. Of course, like what the other artists have mentioned, do come by to the actual space in Stanford Arts to see the real encounter experience. For now, I think we will stay with this kind of static images. What actually I wanted to celebrate is this topographies of Hijrah. And personally, I feel this three word encapsulates this idea. The first one is the idea of forgetting. The second one, this idea of wound or bruising. And the third one is dukkha, to be in sorrow. And I feel like Hijrah always have these nuances within it. But for this particular work, the three concepts which I will elaborate in the next 10 minutes is this idea of maternal, this idea of migration, as well as the idea of moon phases. And just to be clear, these are actually very overlapping. They all actually affect one another. So it's pretty amorphous in that sense. So the first part, the maternal, I think when the group or the facilitator allow us into the life or the lifestyle and the process of making this textile, the entire ecosystem, like what Aggie have mentioned, and also Marina, but Marina also talk about this idea of the feminine energy. I think it was very obvious that that idea of maternal energy or maternal wound, maternal loss, mother nature, all congests in my head. And I was quickly influenced by that. I wanted to celebrate that idea of the feminine energy, especially because we came across this idea of Ninituok. And to me, the rituals of erasure and prayer was very, very beautiful, but also heartbreaking at the same time, because it talks about this idea of people forgetting that myth, of people moving away from that. And I wanted to kind of reclaim that. This too was shared by Tony, and especially on the left, this is a prayer that the weavers, or actually the cotton seeds planters use it during harvest, and I thought that was quite fascinating. There's a lot of homage to Mother Nature, the moon, the stars, the tree, and I think that's very fascinating. So the first idea of this kain luka, kain lupa, and dukkha is actually to create the womb and the wound. And in a lot of my practice, the idea of wound and womb coincide, because I see wound as something which is essentially very necessary to hold things together. And I think it also talks about this idea of the maternal, sense of being itself. So when Tony said we can actually transport these items from Tuban, I was with this idea that can I actually bruise or actually wound up that fabric. That was my first intention. I wanted to unweave things which have already been weaved. So the center portion becomes this I guess gap, this void that I wanted to be the starting point. So it was the starting point in this case. Not just that, also because I'll talk more about the maternal side when we delve into the migration. Migration itself, when I think about the maternal, I wanted to also talk about my ancestry, because being Indian, Javanese mixed person in Singapore, with the whole idea of the Malay culture also, we tend to erase parts of ourselves, and I wanted to kind of bring that back. So I look into my maternal side, which has Javanese ancestry. And this idea of origins is important to me because, we are having this fabric from Java, and that's where I guess the acts of migration brought me or my ancestors to where we are today. So I wanted to celebrate the idea of bodies, the borders, incantations, texts, resistance, and image archive as well, because all this to me are transferred over time and space. So this is a very interesting piece of information that our family holds. This was actually written by my grand uncle who passed away last year or so. And this idea is actually to kind of plot our lineage. And if we go back, it brings us back to this idea of Keraton Solo. And I thought this idea of keturunan, or this idea of movement to Singapore itself is very fascinating. So I began to look at my grandmother's image archive. These were the works which I wanted to incorporate into this work, being someone who is fond of this idea of visual culture. So in a lot of this, sorry, I have to censor this. Again, we'll talk about this later in the Q&A. This idea of the female representation of body in Islamic culture is something quite, it's evolved along the time. So I had to, because without the hijab, then I have to reverse it in that sense. But she's wearing a lot of this, batik and sarong, kebaya from, I guess, regional influence as well. And that is something we don't often see now. And I began to look at my mom's own image archive, and she had very long, luscious hair until a very long time. In fact, it's longer than this, and it reminds me of Nini Towok as well. That idea of, the hair of the goddess. And even during her wedding days, she was actually wearing a lot of Javanese attire and custom wear, as seen in this. And also, I wanted to add, because she grew up as a seamstress of sorts, not professionally, but I think that idea of sewing is so important in the maternal side of the family. And I wanted to also celebrate that through this work. So what I did was I stitched all this, or rather weave all these imageries, all these little nuances of tradition and history in my own family into this image collage. And you see parts of this idea of weaving appearing in the final product itself onto that piece of textile. And here's some of the example after it's been transferred onto fabric. This Organza Fabric, and this was the kind of contribution from my side before I actually pair it up with the textile from Tuban. And you can see how it has this very luminance quality about it, and I wanted it to be that way. Something else which, sorry. So something else which I also wanted to kind of look at is this idea of text as resistance. As someone who looks at poetry and also stories as something very, very potent, I began to look at my own archive of poetry writing in my native Malay. And on the left, there's actually a poetry or poesy, which I wrote in 2007. At that point of time, I have no idea why I wrote it. It felt like something which was waiting or incubating. So it makes sense now that after embarking on this project, it felt like something about this idea of promise, about this idea of tradition, this idea of losing is always in my own trajectory of artistic practice. So I began to write the second piece while doing this project as a conversation to kind of full circle, close the loop. Like what Tony always mentioned, this side of Mancapat is to close the loop, but also to see whether it's in closing, is there an opening also. So these are the idea of the text being in practice. Again, it's transferred onto the fabric. And then lastly, I'm going to move to the last section of the project very quickly, this idea of moon phases. I mean, when I say the moon phases, literally now I think we're having a solar eclipse in parts of the world. And I think that's very interesting that this idea of waxing and waning that the moon holds, in its phases is also something about this idea of change and losing, where there is always that idea of erasure, there's always that idea of rebirth, and also, I guess, birthing new language and vernacular. So I wanted to use this idea of weaving and waxing, literally, using wax as a sign of renewal, as a sign of rebirth, resistance, and also a method of reclaiming, maybe. So if you actually are on site in Stanford Arts, you'll see how I method wax onto the fabric as a way of resisting, what can be lost in time and space. So the fabric started very soft in that sense, but after all this wax are melted on it, I realized it gains a new texture. It becomes even very hardest, like it becomes like a second skin. It reminds me of all those myths and stories about Nini to walk again. That idea of Ninik, Kabayan, when I was reading on it, some people look at her as a goddess, some of her look at her as a kind of a different spirit altogether. And I like that idea of change. And also this idea of weaving and stitching. So on all the words and across the fabric, I began to stitch quite organically as a sense of like protection, but also maybe in the Q&A, we'll discuss that after stepping back, I began to see that maybe in protection itself, there is that messiness and unruliness that we can discuss. So lastly, to kind of finalize everything, what I did was I started to, the wound that we started with, I wanted to unwound it. I wanted to fill it up with something to show that sense of Mancapat cycle. And this should also spell this idea of maturity, death, and rebirth, again, to close the loop. I embarked on this video work within the womb and the wound that we started with. So I actually collaborated with a local performance artist, dancer Alfi Ismail, who actually felt the poems that I wrote, and he performed according to those poesy. And there are 3 stages of it. If you can allow me to just play a snippet of it, maybe 2 minutes of it, I think to get the sense of what this video is about. Here we go. Hopefully the sound works. Okay. Does the sound work? I hope. Okay.
Yes.
I'm just forwarding it to the end. Hold on. All right, sorry about that. I have to forward it because it's quite a long video. But essentially, I wanted to show that there are 3 stages in that: the maturity, the death in the middle, and the rebirth at the end. And what I wanted to portray is that the hole or the wound ends up being filled up with the sun itself, and that becomes the mother nature that is coming back to be part of that picture. So I just wanted to end this. So before I forget, the music was from also our local collaborator. It's a band called The Eats, who also internalized the meaning of the work and did that sound piece. And to sum up my presentation, I just want to say that only with a wound can the light pass through, and for bodies to be one with the mother, with nature. Yet this process is loaded with burdens of undoing. There's a lot of mess, there's a lot of fraying threads, dissonance, distortion, resistance, preservation, because I feel in forgetting and remembering both, it is quite a violent project. So we expect to see some bruises and cracked skin between the waxing and waning of the stories, a new skin and language and cycle is born. So with that, thank you so much for hearing me out, and I look forward to have more conversation with everyone. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Iskandar, for that amazing summary of your work. And I am still very floored at how coincidental this whole thing, because at first, as I was like looking for an artist, Singaporean artist, to respond to the idea of Mancapat. However, it is not necessarily a textile artist or a batik artist. And through coincidence and recommendations from Aggie, and then we got to you, and as you talk more about it, and as you share more like the different coincidences that you finally like come back full circle to the projects and to even the space itself where you like first met with Aggie first, you know. So it's kind of like, yeah, very fascinating to me how world works, you know, in coincidence. Yes, for those who just joined us, welcome back and thank you for joining us today in this Mancapat the Artist Perspective discussion panel, which is part of Mancapat exhibition, the expression of life through the art of Batik Tenun Gedok, that is happening right now in Stanford Art Center in Singapore. And in this panel, we're going to hear more about the artist's perspective, how they interpreted the theme and how they created the work. So, and we have just heard from the 3 artists about their artwork, and I would like to invite the audience, if you have any questions, you can type it in the chat or you can raise your hand if there are any takers to start off the conversation. While I add spotlight everyone. All right, I guess I have everyone set, and yes, I hope you can see everyone on the screen. So if there are no questions from the floor, probably I will ask the artist first. Okay, so for myself as a curator, is very it's a kind of like discovering new way of working through this pandemic, right? With COVID, that we cannot travel and meet each other in the same room, and yeah, we just have to go through everything virtually via Zoom, and that's what we did. So other than like we have to do this completely online, how would the COVID pandemic actually affected your creative process or your work in relation to creating this work? If anyone could start. You can unmute.
Maybe I can start first.
Yeah.
So I actually wasn't in Singapore. So for me and Tony, it was, I think we were concerned whether I would be able to come back, and also the fact that the materials that we were going to use, they were in Indonesia, and having to ship them over was also one concern, because we were never sure whether the supplies would reach me on time. One of the other things that affected my work was the fact that because I was elsewhere, because my practice, with my practice, I use a lot of found materials, and all my found materials are in Singapore. So it was a hard time trying to find found materials in Hong Kong in such a short amount of time. I did try asking my partner to video and actually try and send me some stuff, but we realized that because of the need to have to ship the stuff over would probably be impossible, especially with the time. So that, in that way, it affected the materials that I use.
Yeah, how about you?
Yeah,
Iskandar?
maybe to add on to Aggie, for myself, it wasn't so much of a challenge, I would think, because I tried to retrospect. A lot of my practice works with this idea of finding meanings in that kind of gaps, I would think. So I actually treasured the idea of not having that control over certain decisions. And I see this crossing because I also love the idea that I'm not saying that, I mean, I would love to meet everyone, especially those in Indonesia, but I find this idea of passing the material forward across borders quite fascinating, right? Because it will be a totally different experience if we were to actually go down to Tuban and collect that ourselves, but rather it may be a totally different experience by itself. So for now, I'm actually glad we get to encounter this in a very special way. And perhaps the next iteration would be working together on site to have different variations of this feeling. Yeah.
Yeah, so that is a shout out to all the sponsors out there for our version Mancapat 2.0, right? Yeah. How about you, Mbak Marina? Do you have any difficulties, or like what's your experience like working, because you are in Indonesia, and I mean material wise is relatively nearer. What's your experience like?
Bisa tolong translate barangkali Tony ya.
Ya, silakan.
Bisa dengar suara saya ya? Kalau di Indonesia mungkin saya untuk Mancapat ini mungkin sangat challenge karena pertama kalinya saya merespon tenun Tuban. Kalau untuk kesulitannya mungkin ada, tapi tidak terlalu besar. Terutama mungkin yang Tony juga tahu, saya kesulitan dengan benang benang merah warna alam. Mungkin lebih ke arah sana. Benang merah dari warna alami. Sementara untuk saya juga banyak membuat sendiri benang-benang alam dari benang lawe. Jadi sangat menantang sekali untuk proyek Mancapat ini untuk pertama kalinya juga. Tapi untuk kesulitan terus terang memang hanya mengenai benang merah itu aja toh. Kalau yang lainnya saya rasa oke aja. Maksudnya nggak ada masalah.
Yeah. So Marina is mentioning that the biggest difficulty is because this is the first time that she is actually responding to a theme. As I think I mentioned earlier that her technique and her process is very intuitive, and she just like do stitches as however is being guided by Mother Nature, right? But to respond to a theme is something that is kind of like new ways for her, versus in terms of like difficulties, probably the challenges is to get the materials that is naturally dyed red color yarns that are not a lot. So she has to create some, she has to dye some of the yarns herself using the cotton from Tuban. So those are the two challenges that she has. And I actually have questions on the chat from Vivian. Hi, I would like to ask Iskander about the piece that he created. I've seen the work on site and it's really beautiful. Thank you, Vivian. And I'm just curious on how to piece them all together with like the different techniques like weaving, embroidery, typography to deliver that message and to find balance among all techniques.
All right, maybe I can answer that. Thank you so much, Vivian, and for the also kind, generous words on the work. For me, to be honest, like what Tony mentioned, I'm not a textile artist. I would never see myself in that, but I think it's quite a challenge to see how we can conceptualize and use techniques which are visual and still under the visual parameters. So for me, it was about a feeling rather than a technical work. Which is more so different than maybe Aggie and Marina in some sort of variation, because I think I attempted to do this project to really kind of display a strand of history, a strand of feeling, a strand of moment. So it was never something which has a system, to be honest. All I knew is that I wanted to incorporate the stitching, but even the stitching themselves had a kind of ruptured sense. So it wasn't anything technical. It was all freehand. Between piecing those pieces of organza with the final, Tuban fabric itself, it was very organic. There was a lot of mark makings as well. So when it comes to dyeing it with black ink on certain of the edges of the fabric, the process of unweaving it itself, it was all very, I wouldn't say experimental, but it's very instinctual and organic. So even wanting to unwound that was a bit of a hesitant, because I was asking Tony, is it very offensive if I were to unpick something which the weavers have done so beautifully and is perfectly already completed? But I wanted the concept to be something beyond perfection. I wanted to show that all these gaps are very much needed for the light to pass through. So I think this idea of techniques isn't so much the main factor in the work. When it comes to also like the waxing part, right? A lot of this process become a learning point only after some time, and I actually enjoy that, because when the fabric work started like a few weeks back, it was very soft and tender. You can almost see it like flailing at the wind. But the more I add wax over the weeks, it becomes quite rigid and it cracks over time. And to me, those are new ways of understanding the material, new ways of understanding the process even. And a lot of the learning came after, even until today. As part of the display, works with lighting and all that, it becomes a kind of free form. It becomes like a living material itself, and I think that's quite fascinating for someone who is not from the textile background to work with. Yeah, I hope it answers your question, Vivian.
Yeah, probably I shall ask like the last question. One of the thing that is kind of like across the three work is like very coincidental again that we had the artist meetup, kind of like a workshop for the artists to learn about Tuban, about the philosophy and all the different textiles. And it's so coincidental that like the common theme about that preservation of memory and in terms of idea in the hands, and then Iskandar is in with the wax, and the legend of Nini Tawo, that female figure that is kind of like across the board as well. So I am just curious, like how fast does that come into your mind when you are conceptualizing that art? And maybe Iskandar, you might want to start first.
Okay, I'll make it very quick. Sorry. For me, I think it was quite somehow embedded. It's quite innate feeling, because I think when I was embarking in this project, a long-term project of the new sacred, a lot of the ideas, a lot of the philosophy that it carries has a feminist kind of lens going through it. In fact, one of my encounters with my students are this idea of a new sacred feminine. So I think coming into this project, when it hits us with Ninito work, and also my maternal side of his history, it becomes quite clear that that is something begging to be attended to. So I wanted really to have that sense of the spirit of that female corpus. And when I say this female energy of feminism, it's not just about female bodies, but also the bodies of others, like the minority body, the brown bodies. I think it's about these alternate narratives that I wanted to celebrate, which often goes quite unattended in a lot of secular art when it comes to spirituality and all this. So to me, it's a very subconsciously always there kind of theme. Yeah, I just latch onto it quickly.
Bagaimana Mbak Marina tentang legenda Nini Tawo dan sosok perempuan secepat apa pas pada waktu mengkonsep karya Mbak Marina? Masih
sedikit cerita mengenai waktu saya terima tenun dari Mbak Kiki, itu memang tidak bisa langsung langsung membuat karya di atas tenun itu. Saya tidak bisa seperti itu, karena pertama memang teksturnya saya baru lihat, baru pertama kali pegang juga, kemudian juga mungkin lebih ke arah saya harus berkenalan dulu dengan tenun ini, rasanya seperti itu. Jadi merasa sangat ini benar-benar menantang buat saya, challenge banget gitu ya. Jadi pada waktu saya akan memulai ini cukup lama untuk tidak bisa langsung memulai, karena saya merasa saya harus berkenalan dulu. Kemudian ini sedikit ceritanya mungkin agak aneh mungkin ya. Kalau saya memang mungkin kayak agak seperti itu. Jadi mungkin ada beberapa saat, beberapa lama itu dengan 3 tenun itu saya setiap hari mungkin saya buka, saya tutup, saya buka, saya tutup gitu. Terus baru kemudian juga saya awal-awal saya agak-agak berpikir mengenai Mancapat itu sendiri, yang pada waktu awal-awal kita ada Zoom pertama itu, Mas Tony, 5 pancer yang mengenai itu ya.
Ya, sadulur papat kali mau pancer.
Sedulur papat 5 pancer itu. Bolak-balik saya cari tahu sendiri juga mengenai sedulur papat 5 pancer itu, tapi rasanya tidak pernah klop ya. Tidak pernah kok nggak pas-pas terus gitu. Jadi setiap kali saya harus terus, mungkin bukan mencari inspirasi, bukan. Jadi kayak sedikit ada cukup lama saya seperti itu sampai dengan mungkin bukan dengan tiba-tiba, jadi kayak magic atau apa, enggak seperti itu tiba-tiba saya mendapat kayak Nini Towo itu seperti masuk begitu gitu. Jadi kayak ini Nini Towo nih sepertinya gitu ya. Jadi saya pikir aduh ini Nini Towo terus, jadi mikirnya itu terus, akhirnya saya mencari tahu siapa Nini Towo ini. Maksudnya juga ada beberapa cerita yang saya dengar juga dari Mbak Kiki mengenai Nini Towo ini, seorang nenek tua yang menjadi spirit dan semangat itu hidup terus di antara masyarakat Tuban seperti itu. Dan itu sepertinya dari tiga tenun itu isinya memang akhirnya mengenai Nini Towo ini, karena pada saat saya membuat itu seperti dia kayak seperti terus berkata-kata, terus menemani saya, itu betul-betul. Jadi kayak benar-benar kayak hidup. Saya merasakan itu banget. Jadi saya sampai bilang sama suami saya betul loh. Maksudnya benar-benar saya ngobrol. Saya memang bertemu dengan dia. Jadi terinspirasi sangat dengan Nini Towo. Dan saya percaya banget. Kayaknya seperti itu Mas Tony. Itu agak-agak ceritanya agak-agak mungkin mistis ya.
Yes.
Itu waktu terakhir saya mengerjakan itu, saya sampai bilang sama Mbak Kiki, saya haru loh. Maksudnya kalau di Indonesia mungkin bilang kan berbesemili gitu. Rasanya pengen nangis gitu, karena harus saya antar tenun-tenun itu pergi ke tempatnya Mbak Kiki untuk kemudian dikirim ke Singapura itu. That's believe it or not.
Okay, let me try to translate that. Of course, I don't think I will be able to like convey the passion. So it's very much a very coincidental thing, right? So when she first received that piece from Bakiki, which is our collaborator from Yayasan Sekar Kaung, she has no idea what to do with that. So for a couple of days, she would just like open the textiles and like wondering what to do with that. And then like, it takes some time. So it's not exactly like very intuitive that she wants to work on it. But, and also because of like the materials itself, it's kind of like new for her to work with. So she has to kind of like get acquainted and learn about the textile itself, the texture and so on. So it takes quite a while. And then it just suddenly hits on her about this particular figure, Nini Towo, that she find out more about her. And then she learned about the story from Bakiki as well. And it became an inspiration. And she thought that it's something that she should portray on her work. And it's kind of like, it might be like mythic, a mistake, but it's kind of like she felt that connection, especially when the piece is completed and she sent it over to Mbak Kiki and then to be sent over to Singapore to be displayed in Singapore. So she kind of like missed it. And yeah, so that is like kind of process that is done on her when she was like creating it. Yeah, quickly, Aggie, how about you? Like that honoring women in your the textile weavers, yeah.
Yeah, so actually when we had the workshops, the thing that hit me the most was that all the artisans who are part of making the textile are women. So I wanted to feature them mostly. But as I was looking through the Nini Towo book that you lent me, I realized that the narrative doesn't just start with the artisans. It goes much further back than that, because these ladies are influenced by Nini Towo, because the myth behind her is that she is basically she is the building block behind the making of the fabric. So that's how that influenced what I came up with. Yeah, but yeah, it did like Marina, it did take quite a while. It just didn't come like immediately.
Awesome. So yeah, there's this still a gap of like, getting the inspiration and the culmination of inspiration. And I think, well, it is time, but I have one last question from Mbak Kiki, which I think is like a very important one. So what is the final message that you have that you would like to give to the youth in Tuban about their heritage? Yeah,
May
Mbak.
I go first?
Yeah, sure.
Just one sentence really is for them to hold on to it, because it's what makes them unique, and it's part of their identity. So hold on to it. That's really important.
Yeah, thank you.
Maybe I'll jump in, since Aggie's word is hold on. My word is also to find or to actually welcome letting go sometimes. And I know it's such a contradictory statement, but just now when Ibu Marina was saying the idea of pemergian, but for me dalam satu pemergian itu adalah satu pertemuan juga. I think there's always an arriving and a departing, and sometimes it is about finding the new language, and these languages are actually held in our history, and I think we have to kind of hold on to not just the material culture, but also the stories, the heritage, the oral tradition of people before us. I think that's very important to attend to. So that's my I guess kata-kata semangat for the youth in Tuban. Yeah.
How about you, Mbak Marina? What would be your final message for the pesan terakhir untuk teman-teman kaum muda penerus tradisi di Tuban?
Terus terang banyak harap untuk masyarakat Tuban tentunya, karena yang setahu saya mungkin lebih banyak tahu Mbak Kiki yang langsung juga sudah pernah ke Tuban, tapi banyak memang yang mengatakan bahwa Tuban ini memang sudah semakin berkurang, bahkan mungkin juga yang sudah sepuh kemudian meninggal mungkin tidak ada yang bisa melanjutkan lagi, dan itu sungguh buat saya agak mengerikan dan sedih, karena dengan demikian kalau tidak ada penerusnya lagi itu kemudian akan tenun itu akan, dan batik Tuban itu mungkin hanya sekedar menjadi kenangan karena tidak ada yang pernah meneruskan lagi. Harapan saya dengan adanya Mancapat Exhibition ini hopefully lebih banyak lagi orang mendengar mengenai Tuban, mengenai tenun Tuban, tenun gedok, tenun seser, dan tenun lainnya yang begitu banyak yang indah, sehingga menjadi inspirasi baru, semangat baru untuk terus lebih dalam lagi mengenal dan terus berkarya dengan mempergunakan tenun itu, sehingga terus akan bergulir pembuatan tenun itu membantu masyarakat Tuban juga, dan itu akan terus lestari, merawat budaya. Mungkin itu aja Mas Tony.
Yes. So there are plenty of hopes for the Tuban weavers, and it is really disheartening when I first learned about Tuban textile communities, because many has been like of old age or they have like passed on. So it's disheartening if like no one's gonna continue with the tradition. So my hope is like through this exhibition, people can learn more about the wide variety of Tuban textile itself, and people will learn more, they will see what they're all about, and hopefully to support and to further expand on the, to further appreciate Tuban textiles and for them to be able to learn that their work is being appreciated. So those are the messages from the artists. And unfortunately, the time, as I have passed on the time, let me just quickly do a closing remarks. And yes, really apologize for any disruptions that we have during the discussion. And thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you have a glimpse into the brains and the process in creating these artworks. And as all the artists mentioned, it's not the best experience to see it online. So if you're in Singapore, do come down to see their artworks on display at the exhibition venue at Stanford Art Center. That's at 155 Waterloo Street, project room 02-02. And it runs all the way until 12th of December. And in the meanwhile, do join us on our virtual events as well. So we have one coming up tomorrow at 3 p.m. Singapore time. We'll be doing a virtual tour to Tuban, so you can find out more about what Tuban's like, what's special there, what are the textiles that they have, and yes, have a good time. So until next time, once again, thank you so much. I'm Tony from Untitled Gallery, and we shall see you soon, virtually or in person in the exhibition. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Stay safe.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.